Well, hey, everybody. My name's Steven. I'm here with Brian Slawinski. And essentially, what's going on is we are starting a show called What Does That Really Mean? If you can't tell, Brian's a little bit older than I am. He's been in the Libertarian Party a little bit longer than I have. And I've got some questions. So Brian's going to explain to me what all this means. Hey, Brian.
Hey, how you doing, Stefan?
I'm doing really good. How are you?
Very good, very good. Thanks for having me on.
Man, I really appreciate you being out here.
Problem
So,
we can to learn from each other and hopefully help people understand what's going on in this world.
absolutely. So we're what you call libertarians. So let's just start off there. What is a libertarian?
Well, basically, a libertarian is someone who doesn't want to tell you what to do, and you should be able to do what you want with your own stuff. The big principle is the non-aggression principle, where you do no harm to anyone else,
Okay.
and that's the real big principle behind libertarianism. We try to stay away from central planning, because if you have central planning, then that gives you more government, and we're more for the individuals, and the individuals making the choices that they want to make in their lives, and not have government make the choices for you.
Okay.
And we're going back to the Constitution, obviously. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was specifically put in place to be a check on government, not a check on we the people. And we've gotten away from that quite a bit. We try to rely on the Supreme Court and say whatever they say is the law. No, the actual law is the supreme law of the land is the United States Constitution. And even if the Supreme Court rules one way, if they go against the principles of the Constitution, then they are actually unconstitutional.
Okay. So you just said a bunch there, and now I've got a bunch of questions.
Sure.
Before we get to that, in the back you have a sign that says Slawinski, Slawinski, Slawinski. And then I don't know what the side says, but it says, what does that little side thing on the side in the bottom left corner say?
Here?
Bottom left corner. Yeah.
This is actually a picture of the eagle.
No, there's some lettering on the back.
Right here?
Yeah.
It says paid by www.voteslawinski.com.
Okay. So what is voteslawinski.com?
Glad you asked.
Okay.
Voteslawinski.com is I am the Libertarian Party endorsed candidate to the United States Senate, running in the special election to be held on November 3rd of this year.
Okay.
Running against the appointed Senator Kelly Loeffler, as well as 19 other candidates. It's what they call a jungle primary. You basically you get to vote for whoever you want, regardless of party, and the top two finishers, regardless of party, unless somebody gets 50%, which I would doubt when there's 21 people running. But you get 50. You get the top two, whether it be Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Independent, whoever the top two vote getters are on November 3rd, go into a runoff, which is on January 3rd.
Okay. Whose ridiculous idea was that?
I don't know, but it's not a very good idea, because quite honestly, it's hard to debate when you have 7 or 8 people on a debate stage, let alone have 21. And especially with the COVID-19 thing now. I've already participated in a debate that a few of the candidates, it was basically broken up into thirds, but we didn't have, a few people duck the debate, like Loeffler and Collins, and they literally just ducked the debate because they don't want to stand on their record, because Loeffler has no record, and Collins' record is not conservative and not constitutional.
Okay. So what is your record? How did Brian Slawinski decide he was going to run for Senate?
Well, I've always been in politics. I've been in politics a lot of years. In fact, I started out in the Democratic Party way back when. I grew up in Minnesota, And the area that I grew up in was a heavily Democratic area. It was literally about 80% Democrat. Okay, so you were a Democrat. Okay, my dad was a union member. He belonged to the local union, um, and 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 I also belonged to the local union. My mother did too. And just basically, you were a Democrat. You got involved in Democratic politics. Well, I was kind of what I would call a JFK. I grew up under John Kennedy, and I'm a pro-life fiscally conservative JFK Democrat, and that's the way the Democratic Party was in the '60s. It was a lot more conservative. Then in the late '70s, 1968, before you were born.
If you can't tell, I was born in like the '90s.
Correct.
So to hear, I do remember being in high school and Obama saying that homosexuality was an abomination, and then a couple of years later, the entire party shifted. So, like, I understand the concept of party lines changing, but
quite a bit.
For you to say that they're pro-life and fiscally conservative, I'm like, no, you're a Republican.
Well, no, that was actually, there were a lot of pro-lifers in the Democratic Party up until about 1994. And then yes, surprisingly, in the 80s, there was a little bit of a purge of pro-lifers and fiscally. You ever heard of called the Blue Dog Democrats?
I've heard the term, but.
Okay. Well, there used to be they were called Blue Dog Democrats in Congress. And they were Democrats who were more fiscally conservative, normally from rural areas, and they would excuse me a second. Pardon me. Kind of noisy.
That's all right.
Couldn't hear in the background.
So Blue Dog Democrat.
Blue Dog Democrat. Yeah, there were a lot of Blue Dog Democrats. Like, for example, I'm from Minnesota. At the time, they had 8 congressional seats, and there were 6 of them were held by Democrats. 2 of them were held by liberal Democrats, and 4 of them were held by Blue Dog Democrats.
Okay. And
what, more rural areas, more conservative, more fiscally minded, more likely pro-life.
Okay, so more conservative.
That was real popular down south. You had a lot of Democrats that actually went over to the Republican Party as part of the shift as well. Okay. That's one of the reasons back in 1994 you had the big shift when had the Republican Revolution with Newt Gingrich.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
I was actually in '94. I was asked to leave the Democratic Party. I actually led a group of basically a third of the Democratic convention in Minnesota. We walked out because we were no longer welcomed by the Democratic Party in Minnesota.
Okay.
So literally a third of us walked out of the convention. Never came back, and that was in 1994.
So in 1994, is that when you became a libertarian?
No, actually, I was kind of in no man's land there. So I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure if I was ready to be, libertarian, because I've always had a libertarian nature. I supported Ron Paul for president in 1988. Most of the time I voted for a libertarian for president, depending on who the candidate was. But because I didn't feel comfortable with the Democrat or the Republican that was running at the time. I did vote for President Trump because I worked for him in 2015, 2016. He's done some really good things, and he's done some not so good things.
Yeah.
But we can get into that. The reason why I supported him was because I believe that Washington D.C. needed a kick in the pants, and he's a disruptor.
Okay.
And that's what I wanted, was someone who would disrupt the process, get it away from where it's at. I mean, that's kind of who I am. I'm also a disruptor. I can unite people together. The whole problem right now is that you have one side versus the other side, and they're not working together. They're playing off against each other. Okay. and nobody's doing anything right.
Well, so to piggyback on that real quick,
Sure.
it is now the 11th. Or no, it's the 12th. Today is the 12th.
Yep.
And beginning of the month, I went to the Atlanta Black Lives Matter protest on Monday.
Yep.
And first protest, like I keep telling y'all, I'm like the new guy in the group. And regardless of what happened, like what led up to the protest, which was the killing of George Floyd, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm disgusted by that officer, and I'm also disgusted by people that are standing up for him. The police union has taken a firm stance with him, and I'm just like, y'all can rot in hell. That man brutally killed somebody. There's no justifying it.
I can give you some personal experience here.
Okay.
When it comes to the Minneapolis Police Department, because I am from Minnesota.
Okay.
So I am very familiar with the antics of the Minneapolis Police Department, as well as their police union. And I don't know if you know or not, but the gentleman, I can't remember his name right now, that had killed George.
Chauvin.
Yeah, Chauvin was his name. Yeah, he had 16 different disciplinary problems that had been brought before the union board. He was put back on the job each and every time. So obviously he was a troubled officer, and that really needs to be looked at as well. And
that right there can be like an entire conversation, entire series of conversations. But definitely. What I noticed,
I can tell you from personal experiences, when unions work, they're great, but when they protect somebody that did something wrong at the cost of the union, it's very bad. I mean, I was involved. My dad worked at Hormel in Austin, Minnesota, and they had the great big strike back in 1984.
Okay.
My dad had gotten hurt on the job, and he was literally told by the people that they would wait him out because the strike was coming up, so they would not give him he was doing a job that was designed for two people, but he was told by his boss to do it by himself. So he literally was picking up these great big 55-gallon barrels, and he threw his back out big time.
Yeah, those are like 500 pounds beast.
Correct. And he got hurt. He filed a grievance. The company basically told him, we're not going to pay your disability retirement. He had 42 years he had worked at this company, and they literally told him, we're not going to give you a disability. You better take an early retirement at a much lower rate, or we're going to have the strike, and then you're going to get nothing.
Yeah.
So it's the first time I ever saw my dad cry. They literally told him they would much rather have him come in and sit and look at a light bulb all day than pay him. And what did the union do? Nothing.
Yeah, and see, but like what I'm getting at, and it really concerns me as an American, especially someone that's invested as much time into being an American as I have. When I went to these protests, it was a very strong me versus you mentality. I called Ryan Graham, the head of the Libertarian Party of Georgia, the chairman, and said, "Hey, I'm going to go to this. Does the party endorse this?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, and I was joking. I was like, "Hey, if I get arrested, you bailing me out?" He goes, "No." Well,
protest is good.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King protested. Gandhi protested. The main way to do it is to be nonviolent about it, to bring the issues to the forefront. The whole problem with this is that you have outside groups and outside agitators that are taking advantage of this, like Antifa and other groups that are doing violent things and looting and hurting people and stuff like that. And quite honestly, those who are nonviolent should basically be turning them in, pointing the finger at them and say, these are the violent ones, take them away.
Yeah.
Because all that does is that hurts everybody trying to solve the problem.
No, and it does. But one of the issues I had with the protest was I show up and like this guy walks up and he goes, "Hey, what's your deal?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" and I had on the Volunteers Caucus T-shirt, right?
Which
Um,
one?
Volunteers Caucus.
Okay.
I'm not an anarchist, but like I'm pretty close. Um, and I do believe that I do believe it's possible that we can have a world where people interact freely. Um, and this guy goes, so what is that? And I'm like, well, I'm a libertarian. And he goes, so you're a Republican? And I go, no, I'm a libertarian. And this was one guy, and he got really upset with me. And I tried to explain it to him. And some other guy walks up, because essentially what's going on is I'm at a Black Lives Matter protest. There's a white dude arguing with a black guy at this point. And another black dude walks up, and he goes, so what's a libertarian? I was like, basically, you do you, I'm going to do me. If we can help each other out, that's fine. But just be aware, I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to try to hurt you unless you try to hurt me. Right? And
Yeah,
he goes,
you have the right to defend yourself. So
yeah. And he goes, so like, what's your stance on weed? I was like, if you share, that's cool. If you don't, that's cool. And he's like, so you're a Democrat? And I go, no. He goes, what's your stance on like prostitution? And I was like, it's not something I do, but I also don't think that we should do prostitution stings. And he goes, so you're a Democrat? And I go, no. And this went on a few times.
Here's the whole thing is, here's how you go work on that argument when they keep talking about Democrat. Well, the Democrats want the government to solve this.
Well, then he says something.
Exactly.
I go,
what you need to say is a libertarian lets the individual make the decision.
well, he says something. I go, well, okay. So here's the deal. Let me ask you something. He goes, what's that? So, let's say you got paid $1,000 in the state of Georgia at minimum. They're taking $300 or $400 away from you on that. He says, yes. That's bullshit. I go, okay, cool. So you're a Republican, and then we laugh. Because I didn't want to get punched in the face. But anyways, I said something to him to the effect of, if you just had $300 extra a week, would you give to charities? He goes, yeah. I go, would you give to Black Lives Matter? He goes, yeah. I said, why? Because it's important to me. I said, cool. Would you give to the Klan? And he looks at me, and I said, no, I'm asking. And he goes, that's the worst idea I've ever heard in my entire life. I said, so you get to choose where your money goes, and they don't have the right to take your money. And he goes, what do you mean they don't have the right to take my money? Were they at your work with you today? He says, no. I said, so why are they entitled to anything that you produce, including your salary? And he sits there for a minute, and I go, look, man, I'm not here to start anything with you. Here's why I'm here. I'm here because I believe the government needs to be put in check, and they need to be put in check really hard and really fast. The fact that a man killed 3 other people in a car accident where he pitted, like basically his car hit another car because they were running from him. And then he shot another guy who died, and he shot 2 other people who fortunately didn't die. And then he puts his knee on a gentleman's throat for 8.5 minutes. And that ends up on YouTube. And I'm just like, that dude can only be employed by the government. If I went to a job and they're like, so what you been doing? And I was like, well, I've killed 4 people in the last 10 years. They'd be like, oh, you're a psychopath. Right? Those people don't function outside of government. And the less government interaction I have, the happier I am.
That's why we need to defund the police state.
Yeah.
Because right now what you have is I don't know if you're familiar with the military, the militarization of the police departments.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that at all? I mean, obviously you were in the military.
I was in the military, and I live in the Newton, Walton, Rockdale area, and there are cops that ride around in patrol cars with better gear than I carried into Afghanistan.
Correct. Now, what's that tell you?
They're looking for a fight.
Yeah, and there was a study that was done by the Cato Institute where they talked about how militarizing the police makes them more violent. This program was actually called the Pentagon's 1033 weapons program, where they have tracked vehicles, camouflage uniforms, high-powered rifles, bayonets, grenade launchers, and the use of them makes the police more violent. Police departments are more likely to kill civilians and dogs.
Well, so let's hit on that real quick. When you go to boot camp, and when you go to the police academy, and when you go to anywhere they teach you how to defend yourself or protect something, there's a term that I have a really hard time believing that professionals who carry guns don't know. Minimal force to compel compliance. So if I tell you to stop and you stop, we're good. Like, if I say stop and you stop, I can't shoot you. That's called murder. And I don't just come in guns blazing. I try to go with the least intrusive thing possible first, and then I work my way up, right? But it's really easy to not use minimal force when you know you can beat a dude. Like, if you're underhanded, if you're the underdog, you're gonna sit here and go, how do I not get guns involved? Because there's 20 of them in one of me. Okay, let me try to be really nice and reasonable and talk to them. But when you've got 15 dudes kitted up with AR-15s and 30-round mags, which I'm a fan of, I have them. I have all those things. I've got scopes. I've got red dots. I've got ARs. I've got AKs. I've got all that stuff. And I know how to use it. But when you've got 30 or 40 guys that are kitted up and they're just like, try me. Like, then you have the bully mentality, right? And then you got the macho man thing going on where they're all getting kitted up. And I know how this works. I've been in these rooms before. You're getting kitted up. You're taking your shirt off. You're putting your gels on. You're getting ready. You're putting your anti-chafing cream on. And the entire time you're putting your gear on, people are just talking about how they're going to beat somebody's ass today. Yep. And how they're going to shoot a dude at 1,000 yards.
Wrong attitude.
Say what?
That's the wrong attitude. See, whole problem is that's the whole problem by having all this extra stuff. We're getting away from what policing should be.
Well,
you're talking to your community and resolving certain problems. The whole problem is we get more government involved in the police departments, and then you want government to solve your problems, and we shouldn't have that much government doing those sort of things.
Well, the other thing I think is an issue, like besides taxation, is unlimited budgets. So everyone's talking about Bearcats. And if you're not aware, here's what a Bearcat is. In 2004, the U.S. Army said we need a new tracked vehicle. So they designed this thing called a Bearcat. And without ever testing it, they bought 50,000 of them. And then they got them to Iraq and found out they're too big.
Too hard to maneuver?
No, the roads in Iraq are this big, and the Bearcats are this big. They don't fit.
So they couldn't go through in between buildings, stuff like that.
So they couldn't drive down roads. They couldn't go through buildings. So what does the U.S. government do? Do they do what we would do and call it like, hey, man, we can't take these anymore. Let's talk about something else. No, they go, no. How about we give them to the Newton County Sheriff's Department? And how about we give them to the Atlanta Police Department? And how about we give them to the Porterdale Police Department? There's a city not too far from where I'm at right now called Porterdale, Georgia. And they're infamous for having a horrible police department, like bad police. The current chief has been accused of theft on like 5 or 6 occasions. And it's nothing ever big. Like he's using Wi-Fi codes without permission. He's taken more than 1 soda when he was given 1 soda. He's having arguments with private security contracts, stuff like that. But they've got a chief, a detective, and 4 officers, 1 officer for each shift. And they have a Bearcat and 4 Humvees.
They don't need that.
Like, you can't, what? Why?
This is basically this comes down to the use of force as well. And that overwhelming force will, they're trying to make you back down from whatever they need to do. If you want to talk more about this, I don't know if you know or not, but Rand Paul just introduced a bill in Congress to get rid of no-knock warrants. So there was the lady, I can't remember, the lady up in Kentucky.
So you just stepped on one of my nerves, and we're going to discuss this.
Okay.
Here's what there actually are. They're domestic raids.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what they do in Atlanta with a no-knock warrant is the same thing I did in Afghanistan.
Yep.
You kick the door and you identify yourself.
Right.
Why? Because you're going after the threat. Why? Because you have to shoot that threat before he shoots you. Right? And I'm sorry, but every major police department in Georgia has done a no-knock warrant on the wrong house. And sometimes those involve dead people and dead officers. And I'm sorry, but I'm not that concerned with a dead officer that does a no-knock warrant on the wrong house. You kick in a door, you need to know you're going to the right house.
Yep. Well, the interesting thing is actually basically in 1958, this is the anniversary of, you talk about no-knock warrants.
Domestic raids.
And domestic raids, yes. This was actually Mildred and Richard Loving. They were actually a county sheriff and 2 deputies burst into their home, and their crime, this was back in 1958, was that Mildred was black and Richard was white, and this was in Virginia, and they basically criminalized interracial marriages. And basically it came up to a Supreme Court fight that finally recognized that the equal protection and I believe it was an equal protection argument, as well as let me think here, equal protection and due process, the 14th Amendment, that at the time was called the Virginia Racial Integrity Act. It violated the equal protection and due process clauses of the Constitution.
Racial integrity. These are where government's concerned with.
That was literally the Loving family, the Lovings basically brought love back into marriage.
Okay, yeah. Which is why I've heard this story, because this is the reason they now say Virginia's for lovers, and they did a movie about this a couple years ago.
Correct.
Yeah. So.
And the name of the case was Loving versus Virginia. Yeah.
Okay. So. Yeah, this is all starting to click, but I want to back way up for a second. Okay. At the beginning, when I asked you what a libertarian is, you said that basically we get to do what we want as long as we're not hurting somebody.
Correct. Non-aggression principle, do no harm.
Can you define do no harm? And what I'm trying to figure out is, like, this has been a big issue with me lately, right? I know that punching you in the face is harmful. Mm-hmm. But what about, like, basically rules of engagement? Or death threats considered a violation of the NAP?
Well, obviously you need to go how far the threats go. Basically from the legal aspect, anytime that you threaten somebody is what's considered assault. When you lay a hand on somebody, it's considered battery.
Okay.
Depends on where it goes. If somebody they're so scared because you are assaulting them verbally, and they feel threatened, then you might be crossing the line when it comes to that. Okay. But most time you have to have hands on in order to to violate the non-aggression principle of the Libertarian Party.
Now, and you use these words, so I'm just going to use them because I want to figure out, what all this means. Okay. What does this really mean, right? That's the idea of the podcast. If me and you were neighbors, mm-hmm. and you had $1 million home, and I started grading my property in a way that affected the income of your property, and I started playing loud music, and I did ridiculous things, and now your property is only worth $500,000, right? Is that harmful?
Is that harmful? Well, if you're doing something that actually costs me money, you're doing harm to my property. For example, if you grade your land where all the extra water from your land is coming onto my land, and it's ruining whether I have crops or I have trees or bushes or anything like that. If it's ruining them because I'm getting too much water because it's running off your land onto my land, then you're doing harm to my land. Not to me as a person, but you're doing harm to my land, and I believe that you can take that to court to resolve that.
Okay, so you're not fully against getting the government involved under certain circumstances.
Well, I'd prefer that if we were neighborly, we would talk it out and figure out that, hey, this is actually costing me money, and you can't be doing that, because it's literally doing harm to my property and it's costing me dollars.
Okay, so earlier in the podcast, right around that time, you also mentioned individual rights.
Mm-hmm.
And the Constitution says something I find very interesting. There's two really interesting points in the Constitution. One is, if a right's not listed in the Constitution, I can essentially assume I still have it.
Well, if you look at the Constitution, two of the main writers of the Constitution were James Madison.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually called the father of the Constitution.
And was he a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist?
I
believe he was a Federalist, right?
I believe he was a Federalist. Thomas Jefferson was an Anti-Federalist at the time. And that's the interesting thing, is they actually came together and they actually had arguments back and forth. Before the Constitution was all put together, but before it could get passed, Roger Sherman out of Connecticut said he wouldn't go for it, and they needed the support of New York as well. And New York wouldn't go for it unless they had a separate document that basically put the government in check, and that was the Bill of Rights. And that's where they came up with the Bill of Rights that actually puts the government in check, because your rights are God-given. They're natural rights, okay? Yeah. They're not given to you by the government, and they can't be taken away by the government. And that's the thing that people don't understand anymore, is that those natural rights and those God-given rights, those are yours, and they can't be taken away by government, and you need to fight for them. And the whole problem these days is children are not taught the proper way about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and how it came to be, as well as many other things. And those who do not learn history are condemned to repeat it.
I guess I was 23. I just got out of the Navy. And I got out of the Navy on a medical discharge. I'd been home from a war zone for about 6 months. And if you're in the same boat as I am, don't go to college. Like, give it a few years, because you're going to a very polar opposite area is where you're from, and you're going to want to choke everyone.
Well, you just came from obviously from a war zone, and you probably didn't need to get dropped right into that right away.
Yeah, but I dropped myself in, and I had I had an Amazon account, and I was told, hey, you have to get the Federalist Papers for this class, right?
Yep.
So I got the Federalist Papers on Amazon, and it recommended, hey, get the Anti-Federalist Papers with it. I'm like,
yep.
I've never heard of the Anti-Federalist Papers, or at least not that I can remember. So I grabbed that, and I started asking my teacher in class questions. I'm like, hey, this guy said this, but this guy also said this. And he's like, where'd you hear that from? I'm like, well, I've got the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. And he's like,
before that, it was the Articles of Confederation.
Well, he looks at me and goes, don't ever mention that in my class again. And I'm like, you're saying the Founding Fathers said this. This guy was on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but so was this guy. So our Founding Fathers didn't all say this. What about this?
Well, that's what they argued back and forth about, was the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists and others argued about lots of different topics and what they should or should not put into the Constitution.
Okay. Now, as an individual, I have rights.
Yes.
Do you think a company, an organization, a charity, anything that's not a government, do they have a right?
To what?
Do they have any rights?
They have obligations.
Okay.
Right?
Does the Red Cross?
Totally different.
Okay.
Totally different rights are for individuals.
Okay. So does the government get rights?
No.
So they can violate my rights, but it's impossible to violate their rights.
Well, first off, most of the time the government is the state, and they're very well funded because under the force of law and under the use of force, they make sure that they're funded by taking away your money. So they always have a lot more money and resources than the individual would have. That's one of the reasons why you're innocent until proven guilty, not guilty until proven innocent, is that the government's got to have an overwhelming case in order to find you guilty. That's why you have jury trials. That's why you have jury nullification, where you can, where in a jury of your peers will hear all the evidence, and if you have a good defense lawyer and you were not in the wrong, you should be able to get off because of that. But the whole problem is the state has gotten so powerful, the prosecutors have gotten so powerful that they literally, as they used to say, there's an old saying out there that a prosecutor can get a ham sandwich indicted. So basically, if they want to bring charges against you, they can bring charges against you, and then you have to defend yourself, and that's not good.
Something, and hopefully, Catherine Bernard, that's her name.
Yeah, she's a defense attorney. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she was at the Libertarian Georgia Convention.
She's one of the speakers.
Yep. And at the end, I asked her a question. I said it was something to the effect of, "Is it easier to get off, like get charges dismissed, like before you ever go to court, without a victim?" And she goes, "No, it's actually a whole lot harder to get charged when there's victims, because now you've got to deal with integrity of the witnesses and the integrity of the victim and all these things. But when it's a non-victimless crime, like having some marijuana,
Yep.
all they have to do is prove that it happened." Which I think
sometimes a lot of the proof is basically you have the officer swearing to that you did that.
Which,
just like speeding or something like that, or
which, as we learned 2 weeks ago, police aren't our moral compass.
Well, correct. And one thing you also have to understand too is the police can lie to you in order to get a confession. They can make you. Yes, they can lie.
But if I lie to them, isn't that a crime?
Yes, but they can lie to you, and that's just wrong. And that's also part of the thing about Justin Amash just came out with the I'm thinking what it's called now, the immunity thing.
Yeah.
Let me think. I think what it is.
Yeah, it's the Immunity Act. Laura Williams posted a thing on it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what it was here. I had it. I posted something on it, but I'm having a senior moment presently. I can't remember the total name of it. Yeah, qualified immunity.
Qualified immunity.
Qualified immunity. Justin Amash came up with on that about qualified immunity for that. So,
which goes back to the militarization of the police, because if we cut their force by half and we took all their fancy gear from them and we did all these things to make it a reasonable police force, they wouldn't have the time, money, energy, or even the ability to think about half the stuff they're doing right now.
They wouldn't be able to do the no-knock warrants, and if they didn't have the tasers, they wouldn't be able to do certain things as well. If they didn't actually have the collapsible nightsticks, that would also be something different. Do you know that if they were properly trained in jiu-jitsu, that one or two of them can actually take down somebody with just a couple different holds.
Well, did you know?
Without a chokehold, without putting your knee in the back of somebody, but you're actually using joint locks in order to take them down until you can get them to the point where you can actually cuff them properly.
Did you know that every police officer has the ability to lawfully violate the Geneva Convention 41 times?
That's wrong.
You can't use tear gas in a war zone.
Yep.
Have you heard of Seattle in the last couple of days?
Yeah, that is a war zone right now.
Right.
There you have government. You have the city government basically. They're condoning what's going on there. They're letting it happen.
Yeah. You can't use collapsible batons because check this out. The old billy clubs were meant to make you stop. The new ones are meant to break bones.
Yep.
I had to go through 1,000 hours of gun handling per the Geneva Convention. I went through far more than that, but Geneva Convention says 1,000 hours because you have to do things like check this out. If I go grab my stuff right now, I've got a rifle. I've got 7 magazines. I've also got 3 tourniquets.
Yep.
They don't know. They don't have to know how to deal with a gunshot wound.
That should be one of the first things you should learn. Is you should learn how to heal people before you learn how to hurt them.
We actually, when I went, so I was in the Navy, and believe it or not, the Navy doesn't do a whole lot of things with rifles. So when you find out you're going to Afghanistan, you go to a school in Meridian, Mississippi.
You just learn how to swim.
Not really.
Yeah. I have a funny story for you. My dad fought in World War II, and he was on a Navy ship. Okay, and they went to through boot camp, and they had to do the 50-yard swim they were required to do.
Yeah.
My dad couldn't swim a lick. Okay. So he
did he tell them beforehand?
No, he didn't tell them beforehand. What he did is he had a friend of his take his number and swim it for him and then give it back to him, and he got, that he did it. And my dad would always talk about, because he like I said, he was in the Navy. He was on an ammunition ship.
Okay.
And he always talks about how that how the captain goes down with the ship, that he'd be the last one. Well, actually, the last one would be. He said, "No, I'd be the last one off the ship."
Well, so my funny boot camp story. We're in the water in the pool, and in boot camp you have your recruit division commanders who are basically in charge of you 24/7, and then you have your instructional RDCs who are like, they're there to teach you how to handle guns for a couple of days, or how to do water survival in this case, and just a few different other tasks. But we're in the water and we're doing our swims and our treads and stuff, and they go, "Hey, anybody got any questions?" And I've always got questions. And I said, when was the last time people had to jump off a Navy ship because it was going under? And the guy's like, it was sometime in Korea, and it wasn't the Koreans, it was somebody else, but they had to jump overboard. And I said, "Hey, what's the longest?" And mind you, we're in the water for a total of an hour. You swim 50 meters, you do some floats, and in that hour, you're getting out, you're resting, all that. But our longest time in the water, unless you're just a really slow swimmer, was 10 minutes.
Yep.
And I said, "So how long did it take the U.S. Navy to show up to get those guys?" And they said 12 days. I'm like, what the fuck's 10 minutes going to do? Can we talk about that real quick? And they're just like,
well, you got to learn how to float.
Yeah.
Okay, you literally got to learn how to lean back and literally just relax your body and float and be your own. Most people don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
One of the things I learned, I was actually a lifeguard on the North Shore in Hawaii.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm a pretty strong swimmer.
Yeah, I'm not, but I'm also not really good at anything.
Oh yeah.
But
yes, you are.
I've got a few little talents. But going back to your definition of libertarian, if the state doesn't have rights, does somebody representing the state have rights? Could I violate the rights of the president? Or a more practical thing, could I violate the rights of a state trooper?
Well, not so much the trooper, but the individual person, because every individual person has rights.
Okay.
Just because he's a trooper, it doesn't mean he doesn't have any rights. It means he has rights as an individual.
Okay.
And there it comes back to doing no harm as well. And the libertarian thing is the non-aggression principle. So do no harm. Because if you do harm to someone like that, then you're obviously violating their rights as well. And they're allowed to defend themselves.
I would say that's fair.
So basically, it comes down to the Libertarian Party is about individuals taking more responsibility for their own situation, and you making decisions, and you doing more with the money that you earn, and you make those decisions based on that, and doing no harm to others. The non-aggression principle.
So it's wrong for them to take my money, and I have all these rights to do as I please with my money. What about, and this is depending on your viewpoint, this has kind of happened lately. The government is bailing people out. I got a $1,200 check, and I've got friends that were like, they were unemployed because of coronavirus, which I don't think the government has the right to tell you can't go to work. Like, people should have said, oh, I'm not allowed to work? You're not allowed to talk to me anymore. But they didn't. A lot of people didn't go to work, and a lot of people made more money on unemployment than they did while being employed.
Well, actually, yeah, correct. The way the law was put into place, you were entitled. You were basically given $600 more than you would if you were on unemployment, and it's more profitable to stay out of work than it is to go back to work, because you make more staying off of work than you would being at work.
So should the government have the ability to bail? Like, we're not even talking about the housing market in 2008. We're talking about individual people. Should I be responsible for myself as a libertarian?
Yes.
Should the government bail me out if I do something stupid?
No.
Should the government have the ability to tell me I'm going to do something like not go to work for 6 months?
Should they tell them you can't go to work? No, they
Yeah.
shouldn't. That should be your individual decision. It should be based on the best information available. The whole problem with the COVID-19 thing is the government was, again, very ill prepared for what happened.
Yeah.
And they didn't have a lot of information. They didn't have a lot of medical equipment or anything like that. And they hadn't, they were just very ill prepared for what happened. And
I don't want to say
they still don't really know what's going on with. They don't know everything about COVID-19, and that's a problem.
The funny thing about COVID-19 is, if you look at the original projections and what is going on right now, we haven't hit the original. Sorry about that. There's a lot of background noise. We haven't hit the original 2-week mark. Like, there were some projections saying in 2 weeks there's going to be 1 million people dead. And we, depending on who you ask, we may be at 100,000. My mom's a nurse, and my mom doesn't think we've touched 100,000 yet. My mom seems to think what's going on.
100,000 deaths?
Say what?
You mean deaths?
Yeah.
Died? We're actually about 110,000 deaths so far.
Well, there's a lot of people disputing that number, and here's why.
No, I get that.
There are
a lot of people died of heart attacks, and they were basically told they died of COVID. You know why? Because the hospitals got paid more based on that.
Which, your wife is it a colonel?
Yeah, she's in the Army Reserve, and she's a critical care doctor. So she just got back from New York. She was helping with the COVID-19 up in New York.
Okay. What was her rank? Or what is her rank?
She's a colonel.
Okay.
She's
And
a
I'm not familiar with that. I'm not familiar with that side of the house, but I assume a colonel's 1,000 people or more.
That she's over. I think it's a brigade.
Yeah. I don't. I was never in the army.
I would say probably 500 to 1,000 people,
Okay.
depending on what type of brigade it is. Because there's all different types of brigades. There's medical brigades. There's infantry brigades. There's you have tank brigades, stuff like that. All different. They're all different sizes depending on what they do and what their MOA is, or MOS. I mean, sorry.
Yeah, this says 2,000 to 5,000. And I assume something like a medical brigade would be a little bit smaller. Because training people to and I don't mean this towards the infantry, but training people to do medical stuff is a whole lot harder than training people to kill people.
Correct.
Like your wife went through 8 years of medical school, where soldiers go through 8 weeks of boot camp.
Correct. Well, she's a physician in the civilian world too, so
okay.
Obviously that's what she does full time. But I'm very proud of her and the job she did and the lives she saved up there.
Dude, I think that's really awesome, but I don't think that your wife needed the government to do that. I think super smart people are super smart, and then they do super smart things like become doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly wonder what medical care would look like without all the taxes, right? So I broke my leg a little bit more than 2 years ago. It was $158,000. I spent a week in the hospital. I broke my femur at the hip. Yeah, and I really wondered, out of that $158,000, how much of that was government fees?
Well, it depends. A lot of it, they think that it depends. Was it Medicare, Medicaid, stuff like that? Medicare, Medicaid has a tendency to actually be lower in cost than other things. The whole problem is there's the cost of insurance. Literally the cost of insurance and the paperwork involved and the red tape involved. Literally, is about a third or more of the actual bill. While Medicaid, Medicare is actually they've got it down to it's actually about 3% of the bill, which is really.
I would be really interested to know what things like college would cost if it was deregulated and not taxed. And the professors didn't have to pay tax, the school didn't have to pay tax, and there was no line of tax, no line of regulation. I wonder what it would cost to get a doctorate.
Well, here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand is our economic system. And when somebody starts talking economics, most people's eyes just roll back because they don't understand it.
Yeah.
A lot of it goes back to our monetary system. Are you familiar with the dollar bill?
Yeah.
If you look at a dollar bill, on the top of the dollar bill, what does it say?
Are you talking about "In God We Trust" or?
No, it says
US
Federal
Treasury
note. No, it's not a Treasury note.
Oh, U.S. Federal Reserve note.
A Federal Reserve note. Okay, and when did the Federal Reserve come into existence?
Jekyll Island, either early 1900s or late 1800s.
1913.
So right before World War I.
Yes, and what also happened in World War I? Right before it. How did they fund World War I?
Taxation.
What kind of taxation?
Income tax.
And what was the percentage?
Ooh, I don't know.
Do you know it was this? 1%.
Ooh.
A 1% tax, and it was supposed to be temporary, but obviously the income tax was not temporary, was it? That's when the government found out that they could use other people's money and do what they want, and they continued to build and build and build on that, and then it got government expanded, and really expanded under Franklin Delano Roosevelt and all his programs, all the socialist programs that he put through.
And we still have a lot of them, and none of them are working.
And we're still paying for them. And we need to get back to our Constitution. We need to get back to Article 1, Section 8, where it tells the 18 enumerated powers which the government should be doing that and nothing more. Everything else should revert back to the states and the people. That's called the 10th Amendment.
Yeah. So let's talk about that real quick. The government has certain things they can do. And if it's not on that list of things they can do, from my understanding, they have to go to what's called an Article 5 convention and change it. But there's been so many times that they just change it through legislation.
Correct. That should be deemed unconstitutional. The problem is the courts have gotten in on this because they've gotten part of this as well because they get paid via government. Well,
what concerns me, and I've thought about doing this, but I don't want to get raided, because if you get raided and you pull a gun because you don't realize you're getting raided by the police, if you think you're just your house being burglarized, you pull a gun and they shoot you. I don't want to be in that position. But I really wonder what would happen if I started getting paid cash and then I went through how much money I'm supposed to pay in taxes and said, well, actually, I'm only supposed to pay this much because the rest of this is bullcrap. And I sent them a check for $1,000 at the end of the year and said, here's what I'm going to give you.
Yep.
Stop spending on things you're not supposed to spend it on.
Yep.
Stop funding things that aren't government-approved funding, and you'll be okay. I promise. I've done the math. But at the same time, I don't think, I just know that they'll raid me eventually.
Well, government gets its power by force, and by our consent.
So you're running on the jungle primary, but then there's another senatorial race for senator.
Yeah, correct. And that you have the current senator is David Perdue. He's a Republican. John Ossoff just won the Democratic primary on June 9th. He'll be the Democrat. He won it outright by getting 51% vote.
Yep.
And on the Libertarian side, you have my friend Shane Hazel. He will be running on the Libertarian side, and he'll be giving them a good.
Yep. And Shane says something I watch his podcast, Radical.
Right.
Is his new one, but he says some stuff to the effect of good ideas don't require money. And it seems like the only reason the government exists is because they've got people that are willing to do collections for them.
People get paid. If you can get a job and you get a government job, it's a pretty good paying job, and it's normally pretty stable.
Well, I'm not gonna complain about the fact that I have VA benefits. I'm just not. But at the same time, I'm gonna say that in a way it's kind of ridiculous. I don't see a reason that I serve 4 years, and then if I'm a healthy adult male, I'm gonna go on to live 60 more, 70 more. Why you should be forced to pay for my health care? But there's this idea that the GI Bill is $20,000. So the baseline GI Bill is $20,000, but there are ways that you can get $500,000 or $1 million on your GI Bill. And I don't know of a job that an 18-year-old can get outside of the U.S. military where they collect medical benefits for 60 years.
Yeah.
With only working 4 years. And then they get $1 million in educational benefits. Yeah. That only exists in the government.
Exists in the military, and that's one of the benefits of being in the military. But obviously you have to put yourself out. You have to put yourself between, someone trying to do harm to our country and the people.
Well, I'm gonna stop you there because I don't agree with that assertion. Um, I think right now, 1% of our citizenry, 1% of our population, is in the military, and 3% of the military will see combat. Um, so for every one guy that's heard the zip and the zing, so if a bullet flies over your head, it makes a zing, but if
Yep.
it flies next to your ear, it makes a zip.
Yep.
And if it flies this way, it makes a zang. That's how you know that you've made some awful life decisions when you know, oh, that bullet's flying that way. Um,
Yep.
you've done messed up, Aaron. But there's a lot of people. I went to high school with a girl that I ended up going to boot camp like the day before, the day after. Never saw combat.
Yep.
Never went overseas. Never did anything. She stayed in Virginia her entire time.
Yep.
And she is now working on her doctorate for, it's something, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say her name, I'm about to say something really mean. It's something completely worthless. It's like sculptural studies or something. Like she's looking at art and thinking about what art means to her. And if that's what you want to do with your money, that's fine. I'm just not really aware of why the government should have to, why the government doesn't pay for anything, right? I pay for it and you pay for it and the people watching this pay for it.
Government takes your money through force.
And I'm not sure of a reason that they should pay for anybody to study art.
I understand what you're saying. I think that comes down to the use of funds and military funds and what is the proper use of it.
Well, I do think we could fix 95% of our problems if we gave them a budget and said meet your budget, and then when they ran out of money for the year, we would say, well, the fiscal year is in October, and they would go, well, it's February, and I'd go, well, tough shit.
Yeah.
And they would struggle for 8 months, and then we would do it over again, and they would probably get a little bit better and a little bit better.
And you got to come back to what your priorities are. What's your priorities for the military? What are your priorities for those who serve? Those are serving in combat. Those are not serving in combat, and what benefits they should get because of that.
And I think that real quick, you would start seeing a whole lot less. In the Navy, they call them yeomans, right? These guys just file papers. That's all they do is file papers, right? I think you'd see a whole lot less yeomen. I think you'd start seeing a whole lot less culinary specialists, like guys that don't know what it is to be in combat. Because the Navy split up into two forces, essentially. You have your line officers and your linemen, which are guys that are geared towards combat. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, that's maritime combat, combat in the water. And then you have your staff guys, right? Your support roles. I think your support roles would go way down, way quick. But I really do feel like if we gave them a budget and said, here's the only check you're getting this year, you need to make this last, every government entity would just start, like, they would just start firing people like crazy. I have a friend that he works at the U.S. Trustees Department.
So what you're talking about is you have a budget for individual departments, and this is what you got to live with.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I'm running for office is right now you have an unlimited budget. You have what's called the omnibus bills. They're actually called what's called a garbage bill that they vote for. And right now, the U.S. government is not going through the proper process to fund the government. Yeah. There's actually the standing rules of order are basically you have 12 separate spending bills that need to be voted on for individual departments and individual entities. And that's only been done twice in the last 50 years that they've actually done that. Otherwise, all they keep on doing is these omnibus garbage bills where every congressman or senator that's there gets to get put in their own personal pet project, and it's either up or down vote on the whole thing. You're not allowed to give any kind of amendments. Your amendments are not voted on. So, like for example, if you wanted to put an amendment on the omnibus bill that says, "Hey, we're going to cut the spending by 10% across the board," you can't do that. You're not allowed to put any kind of amendment onto an omnibus garbage bill. So,
So,
so it's either up or down vote whether or not you want to fund it or not.
so I remember when Obamacare passed, I think like 1% or 2% of the bill was actually the healthcare portion. 1%.
Correct.
But then there was like some weird bill that was attached that gave like the city of Seattle money for libraries and
Correct.
museums. Would
Yeah.
that be considered ominous?
No, it's called an omnibus.
Omnibus.
Omnibus bill. It was actually part of it, and that's the whole problem with the process.
Is that idea of taking one bill and then just filling crap in there?
Well, it's called germaneness, if it's germane to what you're talking about, and that's the whole problem with a lot of these bills. And a lot of these they need to be held out of order because they're not germane to the bill. I mean, if you're talking about funding the military, then everything that's in the bill should be about funding the military. It shouldn't be about giving the city of Seattle something, or the city of New York something, or the city of Los Angeles something, when it's not related to military. Okay,
Could you
that's why
stretch
you need
that?
to have that's why you need to go back. You need to have your individual spending bills, which come through the committee process, and amendments are allowed to be added, and you actually take actual votes on them. So, for example, like the omnibus bill, or the latest thing that just passed for the coronavirus bill, they literally had a voice vote on it. They did not have a recorded vote, but they spent more money on this non-recorded vote than 2 times what the cost of the New Deal was.
Okay, so you just used 2 words: a voice vote and a recorded vote. What is a voice vote?
A voice vote is where you take the ayes and the nays. So whoever's in the room, basically you say, oh, okay, all in favor say aye. Somebody will say aye. All opposed say no. No.
So it's based on who can say aye or nay the loudest.
Pretty much. And then normally, if it's close, you'll call for a division. But the whole problem with this is they're all involved in this. They don't want to call for a division because they don't want to have their vote recorded.
So if I'm willing to scream at the top of my lungs, I could vote. I could count as 10 votes.
Yeah, pretty much so. And then, so no one can take advantage of there. Then they ask for a division then, and then you get your recorded votes. The whole problem with the way this is set up is when they ask for a voice vote, nobody has the guts to say, hey, let's call for a division. Or if somebody does call for a division, what happens is the person who's in charge of the meeting, normally the speaker, will not recognize you, so you're not officially recognized, so you can't call for it. Yep. If you're not recognized, it doesn't count. That's why as a United States Senator, one of the things that you really can do is you can actually stop legislation, because through the use of filibuster, or through the use of what's kind of called a pocket hold, you can actually hold legislation up to make sure that it's not voted on.
That whole "I'm the Speaker of the House, I don't recognize you" kind of sounds like, well, actually, I'm the head cheerleader, and we're not going to be doing that today because that hurts my feelings. That sounds like high school nonsense.
Yeah.
So on a recorded,
the whole thing is nonsense, because quite honestly, they're not doing their jobs up in Washington D.C., and we need to actually throw the bums out of D.C.
On a recorded, yeah, there's a reason I'm voting libertarian this year, on everything. Is there, on a recorded vote, or the voters being the senators and the congressmen,
Correct.
they have the right to anonymity and confidentiality?
No, on a recorded vote, it's by your name, so you'll know, for example.
So it's not just the breakdown of 50 to 51. It's Brian voted this way, Shane voted this way, Nancy Pelosi voted this way.
Correct. So you actually say, hey, I voted for such and such bill, or I voted against such and such bill. That's why it's good to have a recorded vote. And one of the things that I would push for if I was uh, elected to be a senator is I would make sure that anytime that any kind of money is spent, there's an actual recorded vote.
Okay.
So when it's a procedural type thing, voice votes are normally okay because it helps move along the process. But again, if you have somebody in leadership or somebody that's controlling the process that are controlling the process in such a way and not allowing debate and discussion on things, then as a senator, you can actually object. You can object to what's called unanimous consent decrees. You can object to voice votes,
Yeah.
and that slows down the process. So, for example, like during the holidays when all the senators want to go home, and you're going through a process and they're trying to ramrod something through and not discuss it. One of the things that they have is you're supposed to be able to read the bill that's presented to you beforehand and have enough time to actually read the bill. Well, they do away with a lot of that. Well, I would not, how can you vote on a bill and not know what's in it? I mean, Nancy Pelosi was one of the great examples. She says, you need to vote on it, and then we'll tell you what's in it.
Well, and I want to back up real quick because I think that a lot of government entities and a lot of government officials feel like they operate in a different universe than I do. So on a recorded vote, I'm in favor of that, and here's why. That's the life I live, right? I have a job, and the other day my boss was pretty upset at me. He walks up and he's really angry, and you can tell he's angry, and he goes, "What have you been doing all day?" And I said, "Well, I went here, here, and here, and picked up this, this, and this." And he goes, "Oh." I was like, "What?" He goes, "I haven't seen you do shit all day, Steven." I'm like, the other boss told me. And he goes, "Okay, yeah, we're fine." And there are times where, somebody gets busted for not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But we keep records of what we're doing, and people are aware of, hey, this guy's doing this, and this guy's doing this. And
that's why it's also good to have a recorded vote, because then you can see how your senators or representatives are voting and whether or not they're representing you or not.
well, I feel like every U.S. citizen lives in that life where their boss knows what they're doing, right? And whereas I'm going to be voting for you, and I'm not going to be voting in any other state, so I'm only voting for you and Shane.
Yeah.
I pay the paycheck of every senator and every congressman because that's where our system works. I kind of feel entitled, if I'm going to help pay your salaries, I kind of feel entitled to knowing what you're doing.
Well, here's the thing is we've gotten away from the concept that senators and representatives that we work for them. It's exactly the opposite. The senators and representatives work for we the people. And you have a right to know what we're doing. And that's why you have a right to know how we're voting on things and a right to know a recorded vote.
So right now, a couple of days ago, I got a little shocked because I lean a little bit more conservative and whatnot. So I got a little thing on my YouTube channel or my YouTube page on my phone of oh, I just lost his name. I can't believe that. The Democratic president nominee,
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden, who in 1994 passed the Biden crime bill.
Sleepy Joe, by the way.
Say what?
Sleepy Joe or Creepy Joe, whatever you want to call him.
Yeah. Anyways, there's a video of him talking about the 1994 crime bill.
Yes. He was a major sponsor of it, and that put a lot of minorities in jail.
Well, he goes on to say, if you look at any major crime bill, what you're going to find is you're going to find the Democratic senator from Delaware. And I assume he was talking about himself. I don't pay attention to where Joe Biden's from. I assume he's from Delaware.
He's from Delaware.
That was in 1994.
Yeah. And at the time in '94, he had been a United States senator for 24 years.
In
Correct.
19, so he was elected in the 70s.
1970.
Okay. 80, 90, 2000, 2010, he's the vice president. We're now
2008.
2000, well, I'm saying, 40 years into his career, he's the vice president. He got elected in 08.
Correct.
So we're now 50 years into his political career. Whereas I find that very respectable that you've had the same job for 50 years, because you don't see that a whole lot. I really, I really feel like if the president's only allowed to be president for 8 years, why are people allowed to be congressmen for 24 or 34 years?
Again, that comes down to term limits. And that also comes back to originally how everything was set up. Originally it was set up that you had checks and balances in the Constitution. You'd have your federal government, which would have three branches. You'd have your executive branch, your legislative branch, your judicial branch, and they all had checks and balances to keep each other in check, so one didn't get more powerful than the other. The problem is that's changed so much over the years that the executive branch has gotten much more powerful through the use of executive orders, through the non-use of Congress actually stepping up and living up to their responsibility, and also of the Supreme Court or the judicial system going along with what's done in government, and not finding stuff unconstitutional, which it should be, and bringing it back to the state and local government where it should be, and we the people, like under the 10th Amendment.
Now, when I was 13, I guess, 15, I don't know. In 2008, 2007, I started noticing, I was in high school, I think I was in like 8th or ninth grade. I started noticing a lot of people were moving, right? And start finding out about the banks getting bailed out, and that was my introduction to politics in a lot of ways. And that was when Obama was running for president. Everyone was paying attention because it looked like either a woman or a black man was going to be running for president for the first time. And that was really historical. But regardless of what you think about Hillary Clinton or Obama, that was like a really interesting thing to look at, because it was like one of these things is about to happen. We're either going to have a black person run or a woman run. While all this is going on, people are becoming homeless, and people are starting to realize that the government subsidized a lot of loans that should have never existed. Like, there were a lot of people that shouldn't have had loans, and the Republicans were blaming the Democrats, and the Democrats were blaming the Republicans, and then people started blaming the executive branch. And I'm sitting here going, you sound like a child. You're going, not my fault. I didn't do it.
I think a lot of the box on both houses. You point fingers at one, there's three. You point a finger at somebody, there's three fingers pointing back at you.
But
so the Republican Party and the Democratic Party were all equally guilty of this bailout and spending this money that we don't have. And that goes back to, and I think we could probably do that on one of our next episodes together. We can talk about our monetary system and on how that affects us and how that affects our taxes, how it affects how much money we have, the ability for us to be able to have a dollar actually worth more, because right now the dollar is less and less and less, and it's been less and less and less since 1913.
Yeah, the beginning of the Fed.
Correct. Since the beginning of the Fed. I mean, we need to get back to the original monetary system we had in this country, which was a wealth-based system, and get away from this debt-based system or fiat money that we have through the Federal Reserve right now.
Okay. So if I misappropriated, at this point we're $26 trillion in debt. And a lot of that has to do with the coronavirus, but a lot of that has to do with other things. I think when I was in high school, it was right around 10.8, but now it's 26 trillion. Um, if I misappropriated, and I have a company credit card on me right now, if I misappropriated like $1,000, so I went out and spent $1,000 on, let's say, a new gun, I could face criminal charges. Um, and I think that on a regular basis, the U.S. government misappropriates money. Um, as somebody running for Senate, do you support criminal charges for senators that misappropriate funds or violate the Constitution or violate their oath of office?
Well, one of the things that you actually do is you actually you swear oath to the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Okay.
That's one of the things that you do is you put your hand in the Bible and you swear to that. So obviously, if they are breaking the laws, they need to be brought to justice.
So constitutionally speaking, from my understanding, there's two things that get you the death penalty, and that is murder and treason, right?
I think there's a couple more, but yeah, that's
Well, I'm talking per the Constitution.
Yeah.
You know, when you watch the Joe Biden '94 crime bill, apparently the only thing he doesn't want to kill you for is jaywalking. But
well, again, this comes down to the libertarian principle of do no harm as well. That's why the Libertarian Party is against the death penalty.
Yeah.
Well, I used to be a supporter of it, but my whole thing is I would rather 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man get put in jail.
Well, here's my deal with the death penalty. It goes back to minimal force compel compliance, right? I started the show off with that. If somebody is actively shooting at me, I'm shooting back. But if they stop, I feel like I have a moral obligation to stop. Right? If I hit them, that's one story. But you don't get to just shoot at people, right? But what I was getting at is there's, from my understanding, two things constitutionally that get you the death penalty. That's treason and killing somebody. But then like basic military knowledge here, Uniform Code of Military Justice. There's a lot of things that just seem kind of silly to somebody that's never been in that environment that you can get killed for. Like, did you know that falling asleep on post, like if you're on duty and you take a nap, you can be killed for that?
Yep.
And that there's a lot behind that, because that's not like, oh, he was supposed to cook green beans. It's like, no, you have a weapon in your hands.
Well, not only that, but you're also putting your fellow soldiers at risk, because that allows the enemy to sneak in and kill them as well.
But there's penalties for things in the Uniform Code of Military Justice that don't exist in the civilian world. There's tons of them. Yeah. Right? Do you support additional laws that only apply to senators and congressmen?
I think we should all live under the same laws. I don't think we should make specific laws for one over another. I think we should. Right now, here's part of the problem is a lot of the senators and representatives are not subject to the same laws as you and I.
Do you have a real life example for that?
Well, the great one is the latest thing with our appointed Senator Kelly Loeffler. Okay. She traded some stocks after getting some information during a classified briefing in January, and she traded some stocks. Okay. And took advantage of that. Well, did she break the law? Technically, she did not break the law. Okay. Based on the way the law was written. But again, who's in charge of those laws? The senators. So basically, they're policing themselves, okay, to make sure that they can do this or they cannot do that. And, that's a huge problem that we have, is because you have government basically setting the rules up to govern themselves. That's the reason why we have the Bill of Rights to begin with. And I would say on our ending note for this evening, the Bill of Rights, that was put up to be a check on government, not to be a check on we the people. It's to make sure that that government does not step all over our rights, whether it be freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom to assemble, that and more. The Bill of Rights was put in place so we can, so government can be put in check.
You know what I find really interesting? Not necessarily the Constitution, but the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was written right after the writers had to deal with an occupying army. And they're like, this is what's important to us. Like, here's what was restricted for such a long time, and we need to make sure that never happens again. And
again, you have the Quartering Act, which was part of that as well. The Quartering Act, where you're not allowed to allow the quarter troops in someone's house.
Yeah,
that's also part of it as well.
Is that the Fourth Amendment?
Yes.
Right. So.
I don't remember which one I'm off the top of the head, but
I think harboring soldiers is fourth.
Yeah.
Right. You can choose to, just like you can choose to, not go to church, right? Like you have the freedom of religion and the freedom of expression, but you could also choose to opt out, right?
Yep.
I don't know how you opt out of that one per se, but you have the freedom to the Second Amendment, right? You get to own weapons. I own a few, but
the Second Amendment is put in place to protect the rest.
Well, what I'm getting at is nobody can force you to own a gun, right? You can opt out. You can opt out. What's the Third Amendment? I feel like I should know all these if we're going to talk about it, but I don't. But you can opt out of all your rights.
Yeah.
And I find that very interesting, right? But it's a basis of here's what we hold important right after we were occupied by another country.
Yep. No, I agree with. I would say a great assignment would be for those who are listening. Maybe for our next chat, we can talk about individual subjects, whether it be the Bill of Rights, certain Bill of Rights. If you want to talk about our monetary system, if we keep it more focused on one thing like that, like you said, keep it to probably about a half an hour.
Yeah, this one's really long, but that's okay.
Yes, but I think our next time we could work on something like that. We'll work on where you want to go, and instead of freelancing so much, we can maybe go more towards more center type questions, so we know, so it can be more of a teaching type thing, because there's people out there that don't understand what's going on. One of the great resources, I can't think of her name right now, Chris, she's a constitutional teacher. I quoted her too, and I can't think of her name right now. I actually did a constitutional course through her. She's quite.
A couple weeks ago.
Pardon me?
Was she on Radical a couple weeks ago?
Yes. Chris, I can't think of her last name now. It escapes me.
I'll put a link to the Radical show in the comments.
That would be perfect.
But let's do this. I'm going to share this video. I'm going to see if I get this on a few different pages, get some views on it.
Sure.
Comments.
Well, I would say the main thing, because obviously this is the first debut of this, is to try to keep it short, concise, and on subject.
Okay. On the next episode, and we'll base this on the comments. If we don't have any comments, we'll flip a coin, I guess. But if we have comments, would y'all rather us talk about the Bill of Rights?
Correct.
Or monetary policy?
Correct. Give them a choice, and we'll talk about that and break it down. If you have questions, we can obviously answer those questions as well.
Sweet.
I want to thank you for having me on the show, and I look forward to more conversations.
I appreciate you letting me pick your brain. everybody, we love you. We hope you're doing well. Comment, like, subscribe. That'd be great.
That'd be great.
Until next week.
Brian Slowinski. Appreciate your vote coming up November 3rd. Thank you. Nice seeing you.
See you soon.